This episode of the Leap Forward podcast is brought to you by Bridge LT, leaders in conversational learning and innovation. Through AI role plays, technical simulators, and comprehensive training programs, Bridge LT is revolutionizing the future of corporate and enterprise education.
On this episode of Leap Forward, Chris Roberts, Group Managing Director of JC Automotive, takes us behind the scenes of his career, from starting in the industry to leading a major automotive group. He dives into electrification, streamlining operations, and how AI is reshaping the industry. Chris highlights the value of training, customer-focused strategies, and staying ahead of industry changes. For anyone in the field, his insights are a roadmap to thriving in a fast-evolving industry, a must-listen for automotive professionals.
Welcome to this episode of Leap Forward. I'm delighted today to be joined by Chris Roberts. Chris, welcome to Leap Forward.
Hello, Justin. How are things?
Really good, thanks. I'm very much looking forward to this conversation. So without further ado, why don't you give everyone a little bit of a background in terms of you and your business and the role you play in it?
Yeah, no problem. Well, I'm Chris Roberts. I'm Group MD for a business that's called RJTK Automotive, and we have two trading brands, Wilson & Co. and Drayton Motors. We consist of 8 manufacturer partners, from Vauxhall, Peugeot and Stellantis to a major partnership with Kia, Suzuki, KGM, and more recently Moda and JQ, who've joined us across 2 businesses. We trade primarily in the East Midlands and Lincolnshire, but we have a site in the Northwest, our biggest site, which is a tri-brand site in Bolton. Our turnover is roughly about 165 million, and we employ about 320 people all told. So we're a reasonable sized business, 10 rooftops. I've been with the business for about a year now as Group MD, and we're currently going through a series of changes to I guess, implement a lot of control processes, streamline processes, take some cost out, and make things more efficient as a whole, with the objectives of making the business, sit on a stronger foundation to improve things like CSS retention, our ability to invest. And on that subject, actually, we've just invested a significant sum in 18 months on new corporate image across a number of sites, including global store concept for all our Kia businesses, and the build of a new development in Boston, which is going to be one of our flagship sites for Kia, which is due to open in April.
Well, let's get into that in a minute, because changes in a world that's constantly changing is very much kind of what I want to kind of dig into you. But before we do that, why don't you just kind of catch us up? You've been enrolled a year, as you said. Give me a bit of the journey to date. Where did it all start?
In the last year, yeah, I mean, I came into the business and followed somebody who I know very well, who was Group MD in the business. So the business has grown from essentially those 2 brands were separate businesses. So Wilson & Co. started in 1998 and grew to what is now 3 businesses across Stellantis franchises. And Drayton Motors was acquired in its first site in Boston in 2013. So that became a separate trading brand, which has developed into a number of locations. Those businesses combined probably, in reality, from a trading perspective, probably about 18 months, 2 years ago, but have suffered a few teething problems getting together because essentially they ran as 2 separate entities. So a lot of work I've done in the last year is to bring together the trading practices and a lot of the back of house functions to make those 2 businesses work in unison together on a more streamlined basis, to try and essentially, as I said earlier, take cost out and act as a group. I've worked as non-exec in a number of businesses, and one of the first questions I always ask a group is, are you a group of dealerships or are you a dealership group? And that's a key question for most owners and operators. And I guess here we are, we were a group of dealerships trading under 2 separate brands. And what I'm trying to do is make it a dealership group that operates in a balanced way. and essentially then can leap forward and acquire more businesses either opportunistically or through strategic or organic growth.
And tell us a little bit about kind of your journey before you started the role here.
Yeah, I mean, I'm probably a good case study, Justin, to be fair. So I started a long, long time ago on the spanners. So I started in the workshop as an apprentice. In actual fact, there was in the 80s a YTS, which was when the government had such a massive unemployment issue. They actually paid for businesses to take people on, and I was one of those. So it was 25 quid a week, which was great at the time, 50 pence an hour. And that's how I got my first job. But I was very pushy. Anytime I saw a door ajar, I pushed for the next role and became a service manager at 21 years old, so pretty young. And then moved through all training areas of dealerships through to general management. And subsequently, I've run many businesses, done a lot of turnaround work on businesses, and a lot of acquisitions and divestments in the past. And in addition to being a dealer guy by history, I actually spent 2 stints with the manufacturer, with GM, working for Vauxhall in the UK and then Vauxhall Opel in Germany. So my last role with them was European Network Development Director. So looking after 5,500 dealer sites across all 27 European markets. And that included things like running the academies, so the training platforms for the Opel businesses, Opel Vauxhall businesses, and actually being involved in the global sales strategy board out in Detroit from time to time. So a fair cross section. I came back to the UK from Germany because I didn't see another role I wanted in GM, and then did an interim MD role, and then worked for myself for a couple of years as non-exec with various businesses, and this being one of them. And when the last MD decided to move on, they asked me if I'd consider it, and I said yes. So here I am. So that's a very brief potted history of me.
What what an incredible kind of breadth of experience, I suppose, to have been sort of, kind of OEM side and the international kind of side. It's great to hear about sort of, your kind of oversight and the running of the academies, and we'll come back to kind of, the importance of skills and training and so on. Obviously, in someone who's been on the YTS themselves and been through that kind of path, obviously you've got sort of that first hand kind of experience. When you're kind of looking at the industry today, what are the major challenges that you see it faces, and what market forces are at play? And obviously, you've talk about some of the changes you're implementing. Tell us more about that.
Well, I guess, if you sort of take the economics out of it, because we all know the challenges of ZEV mandate and electrification and all the stuff that's throwing at us in terms of cost and manufacturer and dealer profitability. I think as technology moves on and compliance gets more difficult, it's more complex to trade at a retail level with people from a sales perspective, because, compliance is important, but you need almost a slightly different kind of person to what would historically have been somebody who's just out and out salesperson. So they need to have some technical knowledge. They have to have IT abilities to some degree, if not totally. And then, of course, you layer on that the management of those skills, and the managers need to be slightly upskilled from where they were. We're seeing a lot more of the use of AI in the industry. I know a number of businesses, and we're not one of them at the moment, that are using AI extensively in used car adverts for descriptions, and some of the templates that you can create with various AI platforms. I won't name any, but the templates can be driven around anglicized terminology, so not using trunk and hood for the boot and the bonnet. And it's very clever stuff. You shorten the words, descriptions, lengthen them, but adopting that technology can be tricky. So I've seen businesses that have tried to adopt it and got it very wrong, because it does expose itself pretty quickly if you're not all over it. And then as you look to the after sales areas, well, of course, vehicle technology is getting massively more complex. And it's difficult to hang on to the people who carry, and this is a personal view from somebody who used to be on the spanners, it's difficult to hang on to, the skill sets of the basic engineering technology. So if you take away the computerization and the ability to diagnose faults with technology, so by plugging a box in, it's really important to retain the skill set of people who understand how an engine works, because some of the basic diagnostic skills have disappeared because technology's pushed it out of the way. And often there are very simple faults that even I can see that you don't need a computer to diagnose. So finding that balance of the person who engages with technology but still maintains some of the common sense approach is quite difficult. And often over my career, when we've recruited people in any business, I've got involved at second or third stage interview, but only to check for common sense and actually a cultural fit with the business. So the skill set, I would always expect the team who interviewed before me to have checked that off. Have they got the competencies and the abilities? All I'm looking for is common sense, which is critical, and then a good integration to the team, so we're not disrupting a current team.
I was really fascinated by your group of dealers or a dealer group. I'd love to kind of dig more into that in terms of what are the kind of key differences and what are the changes that you're making, to kind of achieve that sort of ultimate kind of goal and vision.
Yeah, I mean, if you take some of the high level stuff that we do a lot of the processes in the business were what I would call longhand because it went from one site to 10 sites. It was almost doing things 10 times to get to an end result. Whereas actually, certainly back of house, we can do things in a very streamlined way. So we do one action and it fixes the whole 10 dealerships as a group would. And a lot of those practices are fairly well embedded. So it's been very difficult in some cases to bring people away from the legacy of how they've done it in the past and get them onto a platform that works positively for the future. And I think, the people in here, the board of directors and some of the managers would say they've never really worked for a bigger group. So, and it's almost you don't know what you don't know. So coming in here, having been around bigger corporate organizations and some fairly large groups, you can apply those practices and very quickly demonstrate, some success from doing things a different way. And I think you have to do that to get engagement from the people because it's easy to come in and say, do it this way because I'm telling you to, or do it this way because these are the benefits we're going to get and let me show you how this works. So you're almost leading by example and demonstration as opposed to instruction and direction. And I often find, I always find that develops and creates a more cohesive team in a collegiate environment where people want to work together, and I sort of pride myself historically in building high performing and long standing teams and trying to remove attrition. And, that often people work for people, don't they? Not businesses. And actually, if you can get a line management team and a senior management team and who live and breathe what they say they're going to do, the team will follow behind them and get engaged. You often see businesses where that doesn't happen and the people just have no emotional intelligence of how they're acting in front of people or what image they're portraying to people. And therefore, they don't get the best result out of the team beneath them.
Let's talk a little bit about the customer journey and the customer experience. How's that changed, and sort of what are your kind of ultimate kind of ambitions for that? Across the group.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at, obviously, I've been around for a fair while in the industry, but obviously the customer journey now and common sort of metrics are a customer used to visit 4 times, 4.5 times before they buy a car. It's down to 1.5. I think the industry metrics now globally are showing that's starting to increase slightly more again. So people are making a few more visits, but it's only fractions. So a lot of the interactions are online. So the digital presence is always very key to what we do and how we present ourselves to a customer, because that buying decision from a front end perspective on vehicle sales is often it's 80% made by the time we see them. So we're not having to do as many hard yards in convincing people because they often know more than our teams do, which is another issue for sure. So educating people, I think, also in terms of what the experience will be when they arrive in the business is key. So again, one of the programs we're working on currently is to strengthen our confirmation process for bookings and appointments with people, because we can explain what they should anticipate when they get here. So not only you're going to see the car you're looking at and it's a great car, etc., but actually when they get into the buying process, what that will look and feel like, because it has changed. Because as I said right at the start, the compliance process is now so complex. It takes time. And you can often see frustration in customers because it's taking longer than they anticipated because there's been no signposting of what the process is and actually why those protections are in place for their benefit. So often, people wouldn't know who don't buy frequently. It is for their benefit, and we're doing it because we want to give them the best experience, as opposed to just doing it because we want to do it and torture them to death. And after sales, similarly, we're getting more and more traction around service plans, which is, long-term engagement, which is good. But again, do we explain fully what a service plan means in terms of fixed pricing, you know, um, capped oil prices, capped labor charges, capped price increases for parts? Maybe we do, maybe we don't. We can do a lot better with that and give people what I would say is a better value for money experience. Because often we try and sell things without selling the value of the product. And genuinely, and this is a mantra I've lived and breathed by, we only sell products that add value. We're not going to try and sell anything to anybody that is the wrong thing to sell them, because it's just not right. We want to encourage long-term advocacy and retention. And, to touch on CSS, the criticality of customer satisfaction in maintaining a long-term successful business is often lost on some businesses because they're just driving a score. And actually, if you get the behaviors right and the inputs right, the score takes care of itself.
Yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it? Sort of that the importance of retention and customer advocacy and basically, because of course, that breeds loyalty. And ensure you building a sustainable, business long into the future. Tell me a little bit about how you're, I mean, a great example, by the way, on the AI. Um, Tell me a little bit about how you're sort of using technology to try and support building that kind of, consistent, coherent, and compliant customer experience.
Yeah, I mean, we run, as most dealer groups do, a number of integrated systems around the customer process. So showroom systems, service flow systems, which, to some degree, um, in the main help, but there are holes in them that you have to manage manually. So, the integrations are good, but that you have to watch for holes where things drop through the cracks in terms of customer contact points, and actually customer data quality, which is critical. So in our sales processes, and so, and I mean sales in terms of retail sales to sales and service customers, we have to make sure that our team are doing the double checks to make sure data quality is good, data entry is correct, so we get the right contact points for the future. But in terms of using that technology, we can drive really good data and metrics out to drive the business by understanding as businesses, departments, and people who are not performing. And we're working on a big program internally at the moment to try and drive our monthly reviews with each team member to be not data heavy, but enough data quantity to give a meaningful action plan for each month. And when I say meaningful, what we want are data driven actions that are task orientated. So we give people an easy to understand objective. So what was good this month? What was not so good? And if it was not so good, what do we expect to see in terms of behavioral change to drive another metric, which is X? So you can very clearly see what we expect and how we expect it to get there. And the managers should then follow that through during the month and not wait until the following review. Because what you often see, and we're guilty of it too, is we put in too many measures, too complex, and they're not actually specific measures, that you can measure. So we say a lot of nice words, sell more cars, sell more finance, etc., and there's no data behind it. So we use the tools very much to drive those data points, sales and after sales. And in actual fact, from a training perspective, and people development, which is one of my fundamental key points to any building any high performing team, we're using the technology now in several other ways. So online platforms for some of the compliance training, which is really important. So I'm talking about things like COSH, GDPR, manual handling, display screen equipment. So that's end to end covered now and measured every month uh, by a completion metric for every team member, even casuals. But then we're also using online platforms to enhance the training and development piece internally. So we're developing and you'd like to say an academy, but that's everybody says academy when it's not really an academy. But we're developing internal training platforms and courses that are being put, having been physically presented, subsequently online, where people can do that as a touch point if they join the business. So very simple, short form courses and induction programs where they can understand the basics. And the best example I can give you that is our EV training. So obviously bev mix and EV we mentioned very briefly at the start intentionally, because I've heard enough about it. But we actually have to get better at presenting electric vehicle products to customers. Now that's improved exponentially in the last 18 months because it's had to. But we've created an internal course. So we do the external stuff with the manufacturers, with Motability, we comply with all that, but we've developed an internal course which is agnostic in terms of brand and new or used, but it actually covers the key points of EV, kilowatts, charging rates, AC, DC chargers, cost of ownership, which is presented initially as a physical course or subsequently as a physical course for longer serving people who've not done it before. We've certificated it so it goes on the record of the person, but we've also then put it online. So if a new person joins and the next physical course might be, 6-8 weeks away, because we don't have the population to run a course, then we can do that online. So they can get exposed to that very quickly. So we're using the technology more so to give ourselves an efficiency, a speed to market of doing things like that, and actually recorded compliance level so we can see through the team where people sit in terms of training requirements.
That's fantastic. Tell me a little bit more about, I suppose, the impact of that. So, you know, kind of, before, after, like, I love the completion kind of sort of rate metric, and I love your point around metrics in general. We might want to come back to that in a minute, but kind of what's been the impact of implementing this type of kind of pretty sophisticated kind of training and learning and development?
Yeah, I think it's multifaceted really because, whilst the output takes longer to measure because actually the traction from those programs does take time, months and, quarters to get into place. We see the data come through in terms of volumes, but I think the more important piece is the engagement of the team, because what you often get fed back is the team don't feel like they're, I suppose, engaged with in terms of their progression as a person, their progression in the business, so they have a career path. And often in businesses, and, I guess we're no different. If you ask the question is, do people in our industry often feel like they have a career path? And they don't, unless the manager leaves or gets fired, there is no progression for them. And I often, think that that's a missing flaw in a number of businesses. My view on it is that you have to give people a feeling of personal development, which is where these training plans fit in. So you're always at some stage of a program. You're never not in a program where you're doing nothing. And actually, the fulfillment and certification piece means that they get a feeling of success, a feeling of personal development. They can see in their reviews every month the output of those courses. So we expect to see better traction, better conversion rates, or better customer interaction because they've done the courses. And actually, we can then measure that through the data. So it's almost circular that you can feel it because there is a feel to it, and managers get better engagement, but you can also see it in the data outputs.
And what would be your kind of sort of response to someone who was, particularly at the moment, sort of looking at budgets, looking at kind of economic kind of pressures in terms of margins and ultimate kind of profitability, that was looking at training and development and saying, kind of what's the business case for it?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm going to say what everybody, I guess, would say, and it is true, and I do believe in this. The first thing people cut is training. Now, look, the brutal truth is everybody has to look at headcount because the recent budget and the NI changes have had a massive impact for everybody. So people have to be efficient and carry the right number of people to do the job. But cutting training, I think, is very short-sighted, even to the level of apprenticeships, because we run between 10 and 15 apprentices at any one time. Not all technical apprentices, so we have parts and sales apprentices as well. We fully engage with the apprenticeship levy. So, we are, I guess, fully spent, and I know we're fully spent on the apprenticeship levy, so we make full use of it, which is great. But actually, that's the easy piece, really. What the harder piece is to continue training the bulk of the population who need, invested courses, invested curriculums that need to matter to them and to the business, because it does cost money. If you go back to apprenticeships, because I know our connection was originally through Sarah and the IMI, but I was a non-exec at the IMI, and we did the piece of work around apprenticeship return on investment with Paul Spear. And the evidence from that was absolutely fundamental. It does work and it will pay back. Because if you think about the average apprentice, you're probably talking £30,000 over a 3-year program, and you do need a return on that. But that's part of getting the engagement from the person, because they have to feel that when the apprenticeship ends, it's not the end. There is further development, there is further career progression, there are further courses they can do internally or externally. And in fact, for some people in our business, and certainly for me historically, I've encouraged them to do external courses that are non-related to the industry or the business they're in, because it's still great development to bring leaders of the future on board and understand the wider issues of, economics, for example, the financial stuff that we deal with every day, funding and investment, or even, simple as marketing or computers, IT. There may be a great need for that. And more so, we have to have that spread of skill set in the business that's not siloed into certain people, because then we don't carry we carry a risk that we can't offset with a hedge strategy of cover. It's almost like for me, it's like somebody should always want your job. I want somebody in the wings who wants my job. I want somebody in the wings who wants the technician's job in one of our sites. That takes time to build, and the training for me fundamentally fits together. So we get the right people, we give them the right career opportunities, we give them training to back it up, and we give them a line of sight to say, I can be Group MD. I don't care. I say to everybody, I'm the great example of that. I came from a dropout in YTS to where I am. So if you're really determined, you can get there. And I'll say to anybody from a valeter upwards, you can be Group MD. Why not? Aspire for something.
I love your point around common sense and cultural kind of mindset. What are the sort of evolutions you've seen around the skills and competencies that you need to do the job today? And kind of what do you think are the key kind of gaps that sort of exist that we've got to fill?
Well, one of the key things I think we suffer with, because in the notes that we discussed beforehand, I think is particularly tricky, is as technology has moved on with vehicle systems, the diagnosis of those problems has become more difficult. So whilst I talk about mechanical knowledge to give you the foundational understanding of problems and faults, a lot of the issues we get are electronic system failures. So either control units or sensors, or just simply electronic issues that go wrong through various problems or maintenance. And they become harder to diagnose. And one of the skills that is really hard to get embedded is the ability to explain those faults in after sales. And what that does is it impacts our customer satisfaction levels, because we can't fully and clearly explain what the problem is and why they're so difficult to find. So I think if you talk to any dealer group, they'll find that they have more cars off the road with longer diagnostic times. Certainly post-COVID, parts supply has been a bigger issue. Obviously, Ukraine with wiring looms has impacted that as well. So cars are off the road for longer, and trying to maintain great customer satisfaction with all those headwinds is particularly difficult. So one of the skill sets we try and develop and recruit for is that communication ability of the people who are customer facing, to understand how, not the why, but the how to explain those problems clearly and concisely in layman's terms, so a customer can understand what we're trying to do, how we're trying to own the problem, and what the next steps are in fixing it, even if that fix may not be today or tomorrow because of various external factors we can't influence. And that's really tricky. And I think if you spoke to most dealer groups, that's one of the areas that is certainly problematic for people today.
When you're building out this sort of kind of group philosophy, how how do you get that balance right with then empowering folks kind of at a kind of individual kind of dealership level? So you want that consistency and coherence and standards and so forth, but you also want to, as you've said, develop your people and empower them. How do you get that balance right?
Well, one of the things that I always try and do, and we are doing extensively here, is to give we call them heads of business, but heads of business, general manager, retail operator, um, total empowerment for their site. So within the framework we set of controls, because we have to have the controls clearly from a corporate perspective, but within that framework, I try and hold them responsible to run their own business end to end. And often you see it's said, but it's not true, because the end to end is simply front of house. And I try and get them involved in everything so they understand how a balanced business works. Because fundamentally, there's a couple of key ethics for me. Number one is always run your business like it's in crisis, so you can't fail. And often people, when times are good, they let things get out of hand. So they spend more money, they have more events, they waste money and waste marketing without measurement of it. So always run your business like it's in crisis. And secondly, you run a good business through the balance sheet. So balance sheet to balance sheet is the actual measure of a good business, not return on sales, not profit. It's about balance sheet to balance sheet and maintaining control of cash and assets. So I try and give the heads of business experience and exposure to those elements. So, if this was your business and you were investing your pension in this business, what would that look like? And would you be happy to make those decisions? And often it's as simple as starting with, if somebody says, Chris, what should I do about this? What would you do? Tell me what you would do. And then if they've got a good decision, you go with it. If they've not, you discuss it with them and suggest things as opposed to telling them. And unfortunately, sometimes you have to let people have a few small fails, because then they learn from that and do better next time. I think one of the things that businesses often do is don't allow that to happen. So people never get experience. And the default is always to refer back to their boss or the regional manager and let them make the decision. And then guess what? I can't be held responsible for it. Now, whilst I say being held responsible, I mean that in a balanced way, that we succeed and fail together. So if I let them make a decision that doesn't work, ultimately it's still my responsibility, because I let that happen. So I'm never going to hold anybody out to dry and say, well, you made a bad decision, it's your fault, because I've allowed them to do that as a development plan. Um, so I think that in essence, and that cascades through the team, brings the team on more collegiately, and they've all got skin in the game. So we've aligned our accounts team more closely to the operations team so that they can actually have skin in the game for the result, because that wasn't happening. And so the accounts team were completely absolved of any responsibility for performance. And that's just not right. They've got to have skin in the game. So we've aligned the FCs to the businesses, the FCs sitting on all the fundamental meetings and the forecast and management accounts outputs. So they are now equally aligned and responsible for performance in the businesses as the head of business and their team. So, and I think, none of it's rocket science. It's just understanding what people need to feel and need to see to be part of that team. And as I say, I say to everybody, and again, it's a bit of a throwaway saying in some cases, but we succeed and fail together. If one of our business is failing, we're all failing, and I particularly am failing because I'm Group MD. So anything that happens is ultimately down to me.
So look, looking forward, what major trends do you see coming in the years ahead?
I think the technology piece, again, to touch on it, the AI stuff is going to have a more and more fundamental foothold in what we do. I mean, the concerns that you would have is whether AI does take over some roles that are currently done by people. I'm not sure it can entirely do that, nor should it. And there needs to be control there. So I think there has to be some protections in place for that. But I think AI will make things more efficient one way or another. We'll have to engage with it because there'll be no choice. And I think we have to continue to look at technology to streamline the business and gain more efficiencies when you consider the headwinds of the cost base that are coming and some of the legislative mandates that are happening. We just have to continue to find ways of holding margin retention, because that's what's under pressure for us and the OEMs. So we have to embrace the technology more and more and find ways of lean distribution, if that's the best way of putting it. I did a project some years ago with a colleague of mine, And we looked at how you could get a 2-acre dealership on 1 acre, and those are the kind of things we're going to have to think about to take cost out of the distribution channel to make sure we can retain margins and retain our balance sheet strength to invest in the future.
And looking back, I suppose, in a sense, to the Chris that dropped out of the YTS program, what one piece of advice would you give him entering the industry today?
If I was giving anybody any advice in the industry or any role, actually, is always be invaluable to your boss. So, do the hours, put the effort in, have some common sense. If you're not sure, ask the question, but always be one step ahead if you can of what your boss is expecting. And you'll always get the opportunities when the door opens. And when I've had an opportunity, I've always taken it, whether I was worried about it or not. I've always tried, because guess what? You only regret what you don't do. So have a go.
Love it. Chris, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, just it's been a pleasure.